Hey, everybody, welcome to the Addiction Unlimited podcast, where you get to learn everything you want to know about addiction and recovery. I'm your host, Angela Pugh, co-founder of Kansas City Recovery, life coach, and recovering alcoholic. To learn more about me, you can listen to episode 0 on your podcast app or find us on the web at addictionunlimited.com. Hey, Mark, thanks so much for coming on and doing this episode with me. I'm really excited to get into this conversation and really introduce everybody to what you do, what your passions are, all of those good things. So thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So why don't we start with just tell everybody a little bit about you and what you do.
Right. Well, I initially worked as a psychiatric nurse 35 years ago, and I was in what we called a locked ward back then, which were deemed or sort of housed people who were deemed either a danger to themselves or a danger to other people, or both. So it was quite intense, and I was fascinated by the idea that we could help people, but not necessarily purely through drug treatment. So I became interested in psychotherapy. I retrained as a hypnotherapist and also did psychotherapy training and sort of melded the two together using hypnosis and other therapeutic techniques. And eventually started teaching hypnotherapy and psychotherapy on workshops all around the UK. Then we began, me and my business partner, started teaching on a diploma course at Brighton University on the south coast of England. And we did that for 10 years. And I was also doing training for other companies, big seminars on self-esteem and bullying in the workplace. And we came online in 1999 and set up a site called hypnosisdownloads.com. In 2003, so that's been running 20 years, and we do lots of online training now as well. So I guess I'm a kind of therapist / trainer, and also I write a weekly blog as well. So I've done 500 of those on all kinds of topics.
Now, I want to ask you, because I know you said you were trained in hypnotherapy. Is hypnotherapy, I'd love to get into that in a little more detail, what that means and what it does. And is it something people can do at home? Because I feel like I've seen these hypnosis at home courses or programs. Is that realistic?
So certainly doing this on your own can be powerful. Ideally, you'd want to see someone who's skilled in therapeutic technique and hypnosis. But yeah, certainly people use it for themselves. And I did that myself for public speaking. Initially, I was reticent or nervous and anxious public speaking. And after using self-hypnosis, I found that I could no longer be nervous, for better or for worse for the people listening. I could no longer get worried about it. So it's a sort of happy limitation. So you can certainly turn things around for yourself, yeah.
Is there a certain state of mind that you really have to be in? I'll tell you the correlation I'm making in my brain and where my line of questioning is coming from. I think of like EMDR, which is trauma therapy, right? And there's certainly EMDR you definitely want to do with a professional. There also are courses and modalities that you can use at home. I have done both, and I'm a believer that my really major work, certainly in my beginning, my big trauma work had to be done with a professional, certainly to learn and understand the process, because it's not something that you just go into and it works, right? It's like you have to have a certain level of buy-in, so to speak, and you have to be in a certain state of mind for it to be really successful. Is hypnosis the same?
Yes, we can distinguish hypnosis from trance state. So hypnosis will be using a therapeutic trance in order to affect beneficial change, whereas a trance state can happen quite naturally, and in fact happens in addictions and trauma as well. So for example, if we think about the stage hypnotist might take someone who's extremely gifted hypnotically, and then they may give them focus their attention, narrow their attention right down, then give them a hypnotic suggestion or a post hypnotic suggestion that every time they say a certain word, the hypnotist, then the subject will do something bizarre. Okay, so in psychology we call that a pattern match, or it's just an external stimulus produces an internal response through a trigger or a pattern match. Okay, so this happens when people are traumatized. I see lots of traumatized people with PTSD and veterans and so forth. The trauma happens in exactly the same way that the stage hypnotist post-hypnotic suggestion works. So, for example, I work with a guy who'd been in Helmand province in Afghanistan, and his friend had been killed by a roadside bomb. And back in England, he couldn't walk by the side of the road. He had to walk in the middle of a road, which is obviously quite dangerous because he was so traumatized. And every time he heard fireworks, there'd be a pattern match, a post-hypnotic suggestion, if you like, from the environment to go back and hypnotically regress to his time in Helmand. So he was no longer in England, back in Afghanistan. So you see, the brain is working in that trance-like way. We wouldn't, so it would be rather than just a cognitive condition, it would be a hypnotic condition or post-hypnotic condition. This is why CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, seems to be 50% more effective when you use hypnosis with it, because people often know why they have a problem or know what thoughts they're having, but they can't help it because of the hypnotic emotional trance effect of the state that they're in. So, and I've totally forgotten the initial question. Oh yes, so you'd have to be. I sort of tranced out for a moment there. You'd have to be in the. You have to capture somebody's attention and interest in order to hypnotize them. Yeah.
And is hypnosis or hypnotherapy the same thing or similar to what we hear subliminal messaging and those sort of things? Are those related?
Certainly the conscious mind can really be kind of removed from the process sometimes. So, I mean, I've had people who think they weren't in hypnosis because they could hear everything that I said and recall a lot of it, or they think they weren't in hypnosis because they couldn't recall anything I said, and so they thought they must have been asleep. But so we can use the hypnotic medium in all kinds of ways, and certainly subliminal messaging can be effective, but the senses have got to pick up the subliminal message. It's got to be available to some form of consciousness, but perhaps not this sort of very aware consciousness. Consciously, we can be aware of about 40 aspects of reality at one time, whereas unconsciously, we can pick up millions of impulses that never make it to consciousness, but can still affect our behavior. Certainly, sometimes, I remember a client who was extremely anxious about something, and I told them, when they were deep in hypnosis, I told them a story about a little anxious monkey and a wise owl that sort of flies over the scene and kind of calms everything down. And she said that later on, in a subsequent session, she said that she'd grown really fond of owls, since our session, but she didn't know why. She had a picture of an owl on her wall now, and whenever she looked at it before the day started, she felt an immense sort of feeling of calm and wisdom and so forth. Okay, but she didn't remember consciously the story. So, which is okay, because we don't have to analyze everything. We can try to analyze everything, but it's impossible to analyze all experience, because so much experience happens beyond, below, or outside of conscious awareness.
Well, and the brain is so complex. Like, it's really hard to try to analyze every little thing and figure out why and how and where and how to change it, because we don't even have the realm of knowledge to do so, really.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, it's as complex as anything else, or perhaps everything else in the universe. So to say that we understand exactly how everything works, take placebo effect, for example. It's so well recognized that drug companies and researchers have to allow for the placebo response in their research of a new drug. and certainly antidepressants have a huge placebo response, and other sort of psychotropic medication as well. But it's still not fully understood exactly how the placebo response works, because it's been found that even when people know it's a placebo, it can be effective.
It's still effective, right?
I'm giving you a placebo. You know it's a placebo, and it can still help you, which is kind of and it kind of confounds the idea that we have to believe in the placebo for it to work. So it's still quite mysterious, even that, But it's such a well observed phenomenon that researchers and scientists have to take account for it in all the research that they do.
Yeah. Take a moment and explain to the audience what the placebo effect is for anyone listening that doesn't know.
Okay, well, the placebo response is and again, it could work like a hypnotic suggestion. You're rather than being given an active medication, you're given an inert substance that you believe is an active medication, or as I just said, even if you don't, but it then brings about a sort of physical change in you. So they found that the more extreme the placebo, the greater the ritual of the placebo, if you like, the greater the effect. So they found that doing knee surgery, but without actually doing surgery, just opening up the knee, would have a big impact on people with arthritis. You're no longer allowed to do that. This research was done quite a few decades ago. So you can't do placebo surgery anymore. But it seems to be even more effective than just giving people a dummy pill, and it's obviously the healing powers of the mind are having an effect on the body. So it's not just that the person has a different orientation psychologically, but the psychological orientation is affecting directly the body and the way the body heals. You also have the nocebo effect, which is the evil twin of placebo, in which someone believes they're getting ill, or things are getting worse, and the belief or the focus of the mind actually brings about that as well.
The worsening of the symptoms.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why therapists need to know about language and how to use positively orientated language, and also medical practitioners do as well, because they could inadvertently medically hex, as they call it, by offering a nocebo, the opposite of a placebo, to a patient by using language which is perhaps insensitive or ill-advised.
Right. So you got your beginning in your career in a lockdown psychiatry hospital, correct?
Yeah.
And what was your experience there that really molded you to go down this path that you're on now?
I think sympathy. I remember lots of the people were very sort of tragic, lots of the patients. And I felt that the system was a very sort of revolving door. So if they did get out, they'd come back in again. And it wasn't really looking at their lives or their beliefs or their hopes or the disappointments, but their neurochemistry. And I recall there was a sort of garden area, and we were having a barbecue, and there was music playing, and I suddenly felt incredibly sad that I don't, I just had this sadness wash over me, because they were all sitting there, and it just seemed very sad. And I kind of thought there's got to be a better way to help people. So yeah, so that was really the sort of springboard and event. It's a sort of job that I felt I couldn't do for long term, because it wasn't particularly healthy or well paid either, and I had a young family at the time. So yeah,
Yeah, this kind of work is challenging. It's the same thing with addiction, where people are relapse. A lot of people relapse many times before their recovery actually sticks. It can be really challenging.
yeah,
There are almost always, of course, co-occurring mental health struggles, addiction, anxiety, depression are pretty normal. ADHD is pretty normal for people with addiction issues because it's the same area of the brain, right? All that wiring is intermingled. Um, and it can be really hard work to do on a long-term basis. And I would think even more on the psychiatric side of it because the system is so challenged as a whole
hmm.
and our methods for treating people are challenged. I mean, it's not a whole person approach, I don't believe.
Well, that's true. you can get into the situation of the physician or the psychiatrist as seeing the patient not as a patient but as a disease with an inconvenient patient attached to the disease. So so they're focusing on disease. I'm not really interested in you. I'm interested in the disease. I mean, there's lots of wonderful physicians and psychiatrists, of course there are, but that is a
Yeah.
danger that can happen. We don't actually look at the person in the round. As far as addiction is concerned, and escaping and coming back to the addiction, we could almost use the analogy of an abusive relationship. That the addiction somehow convinces the addict that they can't live without them. Even though they're abusing the person, the alcohol is abusing you, or the cocaine, or the shopping addiction, or whatever it is. You can't live without me. And without me, you're nothing. And I'm familiar, so at least I'm familiar to you. So the person tries to escape, like an abusive relationship. They get up courage, they escape, but then they go back again, because they're having a bad day, and it's almost as if the addiction calls them up and sweet talks them again, and before you know, they're back with the addiction again, and it's like a couple, a sort of dysfunctional couple, until the person learns to live beyond the addiction. And this is actually an analogy.
It's the seduction of comfort, right? And
Yeah,
the addiction offers that only in an instant gratification kind of way,
yeah,
but it does offer that comfort. And
mm,
when you are faced with an overwhelming situation or overwhelming life, overwhelming feelings, and you don't have another solution,
mhm,
I think human nature, you will always default to the comfort that
yeah,
you know
yeah,
will
absolutely,
be there,
yeah.
even if it's unhealthy.
And it's escapism, because it's funny, we people talk about mindfulness and living in the moment, and just being in the moment, which can be used well, can be really healthy, but also addiction does that as well, in that you can forget about the past, you can forget about long-term consequences, certainly, and you can just be in the here and now. So you're escaping from perhaps an unpleasant situation. So when treating addictions, I like to look at two things really. I like to look at basic or primal emotional needs. So we all have needs to feel safe and secure, to feel connected to other people, for intimacy, for meaning and purpose and goals in life, for privacy, for friendship and self-respect and self-esteem. These are all sort of basic needs that all of humanity shares. And then we think, well, what needs isn't the person meeting that they're trying instinctively to meet through the addictive pattern? You know, so it could be safety when people first start drinking. If they're very shy, if you feel very shy and socially anxious, you don't feel safe socially. But alcohol seems to comes along and charms you and hoodwinks you and sweet talks you into pretending to be the solution to that. you know. And for a while it is, but then it has diminishing returns, and then it starts to steal more than it gives. It's like a charming con man will come along and they will give you genuine things to start with. It's not that they're boring or dull or not exciting, and aren't giving you rewards, but then bit by bit and not immediately, they start taking much more than they give, and that's exactly how an addiction works. So that's one aspect. We need to look at the basic needs of the person. What attracts them to what they're addicted to? You know, with a shopping addict, they might talk about hunting for bargains. The hunting is a trance state. When you're hunting something, you narrow your focus of attention down. So it's escapism. Yes, yeah, so that's what it's giving them.
It's so funny, I always say that about shopping. Like, if shopping for me is not about buying things, it is the escape of the process.
Yeah,
It is the shutting down and just being in the process, and probably a little addiction to hope because you never know what you're gonna
that's
find,
right.
and there's this beautiful feeling that you never know what you're gonna come across, and that's really exciting and fun.
Well, that's right, and so that's another element to it: unreliable reward or intermittent reward. So they found, I think it's B.F. Skinner, the behaviourist, found that with cats, that if they pushed a lever, do you say lever in the States? Lever, I don't know.
Yeah, we say lever. You can
Okay.
say lever.
We say lever. You say lever, I say lever. That if they always got food as a reward every time they pushed the lever, then they wouldn't get addicted to that because it was if sometimes you do get reward and sometimes you don't, it becomes much more compulsive. So if someone's in an abusive relationship, for example,
Mm,
if someone's always nice to them, they can be too nice, you know. But if someone's horrible to you sometimes and sometimes nice, you really value the niceness. You know, we wouldn't value diamonds if they grew on trees, but because they're rare, we value them more.
mhm,
So we're more likely to become compulsively engaged with something that gives us an unreliable reward. You know, but the cats would get addicted to the process of pushing the lever if once randomly it got rewarded for doing that, but not every time. It's the same with gambling. If every time you gambled you won, $1 million, then although it would be quite useful for your bank balance, it wouldn't be that compulsive. But it's because it just might happen this time.
right.
It's the same with bargain shopping as well. We become addicted to something that doesn't always proffer us a reward. And people value the niceness of someone who's rough with them sometimes more,
Mhm.
right or wrong, perhaps, than someone who's always reliably wonderful to
That's so funny. I've never heard anybody talk about bargain shopping like that, and, you just, like, explained my life.
them. Yeah, and lots of people's lives. I mean, that's how it's done. And again, that's why marketeers will try to shut things down. They'll say, for today only, there's a special offer. And if that special offer was there all the time, then it wouldn't be rare. You wouldn't feel like you got something, hunted something down. Although it's just given to you on a plate, really. But yeah, so we can see the marketeers are onto this psychology of addiction.
Yeah, and the scarcity, we call it
Yeah.
scarcity in the marketing world. You want to instill that sense of scarcity
Hmm.
because you do. I think it is human nature that you will take things for granted, right? If it's available all the time, yeah, that makes perfect sense. You don't value it as much. It's like, "Ah, I don't need to worry about it today. I can do it
Yeah.
tomorrow. It'll be there tomorrow. It'll be there next
Mm.
month."
And then we really appreciate something when it's no longer there, and
Interesting.
we wonder why we didn't appreciate it more.
Yes,
It's human condition, isn't
right. Which is how everybody feels about their it's how everybody feels about their sobriety when they relapse. They're like,
it?
"Oh
Yeah,
gosh, that was
yeah,
actually really good. I did actually really like being sober, and I really appreciated how I felt when I was sober, and I just wanna
yeah,
get
yeah.
back
No,
there."
that's right. I mean, the other thing about motivation or motivation to engage in something that we're addicted to, is that it's mediated by dopamine. Dopamine is a sort of reward chemical, or it's a pathway in the brain, the dopamine pathway, and it's really there to help us engage in activities which are good for us. You get really thirsty on a hot day, you drink water, and you get a sort of release of pleasure, doing that, or you eat, or you rest when you're very hungry. Dopamine is trying to get you to fulfill needs which are there for survival or for learning. And it works in exactly the same way. So, for example, if you're learning a new guitar piece, or on the piano, and you master something, but eventually, and it gives you some pleasure because the dopamine reward pathways have been sort of activated and fulfilled. But then you get habituation, like you do with addiction. So now it's not enough to play that one piece, and you need to learn another piece, and so forth. So you need to learn more and more to get the same reward. And addiction hijacks that natural and healthy process. But the other thing addiction does, or dopamine does, is it causes amnesia for negative consequences, which is why people can feel left feeling really stupid after they've gambled again when they said they wouldn't do it, or drunk again after they said they wouldn't do it. Because before, when the addictive trance descends on a person, it's all about motivating behavior, and dopamine is produced, and we're encouraged by our own systems to fulfill the expectation of the addictive trance. And dopamine laced memories block out memories of the consequence of engaging in those addictive behaviors, if that makes sense. So it's not that we don't know them, but
That darn dopamine.
yeah. but we just focus on the last time we partied and felt great, or the excitement of going to the casino, or the feeling of going to the stores. Not that you need to do. I mean, you can do all of that online anyway. That's all that's in our mind when we're in the addictive trance state. So one of the things I do hypnotically with people who are addicted is I want to break that trance state before it gets started and hypnotically train them to, as soon as the trance descends, to actually feel associated to the downsides of the behavior. So they're remembering how terrible they feel afterwards, or how angry and disappointed their loved ones are when they've, spent $20,000 on something that they can't afford. So we're kind of using negative motivation as well as positive motivation when we're treating addiction because of this amnesia effect.
Right. Yeah, that's so fascinating and so right on the money. I mean, it makes perfect sense in everything that I've seen, certainly in all the years of my career and working in addiction. I didn't know that it had that amnesia effect and actually made you forget. So this is something that I've heard, I'm a 12-step person. I got sober in AA, and you hear all the time people say, well, you forget how bad it was. But for me, I never forgot how
Mm.
bad it was. Like, even now, I just celebrated 17 years sober, and I still to this day have never forgotten how bad
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was. So, how does that shift? Like, for somebody like me that doesn't have that struggle, right? Like, and maybe I've always assumed that I had a rock bottom moment that was fairly tragic and terrifying. And it just really solidified, like, alcohol is no longer an
Mm.
option in my life. But I could never, even if I wanted to, I feel like I could never forget how bad it was. Not only the feeling in that rock bottom moment, but the feeling I felt every single day of my life when I woke up, and the self loathing and despising my life and being so sad that I even woke up, because it was so
Mm.
painful to think about how to get through a day. Like, I can never forget that.
Yeah, I mean, it's we do that has to become larger, that reality, than the pull.
Right.
And one thing I'll often do is talk to somebody about what the addiction has stolen from them, what it steals from them. So I'll use sort of metaphors and analogies which hopefully stick in the mind. I treated a smoker, a 60-day smoker, and he stopped smoking, and then 15 years later he came back again, and it started again when a friend had died. So you often find these areas of vulnerability in people, and they start up again. He was a very adroit businessman, and he was also owned property, real estate, and he was a landlord, and I built up the picture. I said, I asked him about his tenants, and then I talked about what would you do, how would you feel about one of your tenants not paying any rent, in fact, you paying them to be there, and then they begin to wreck the property from the inside. So the walls start to rot, everything's stained and destroyed. And in fact, because of what they're doing, the very foundations of the whole building are under threat. What would you feel? Would that be a good deal? And he said, I know exactly what you're talking about. I can't smoke anymore. Because, of course, smoking is a tenant. It sits within inside, it nests in people. They pay for it to be there whilst it's wrecking the joint. And that's not a good deal. So I'll talk to smokers about the deal of smoking. I've got a how to stop people smoking online course, and there's some footage of me treating a smoker, and she says she does enjoy smoking. So I tell her, well, I don't want to stop anyone doing what they enjoy. I'm not a killjoy. So I say, you should absolutely carry on smoking if the deal is worth it. Okay? If the deal is worth it, what do you get? As opposed to what does it get? So we're personifying the addiction. So, well, she might. So what does it get first? Well, it might get 20 years of her life because she's already getting sick. It might get time spent with her grandchildren. It might get, or certainly will get, youthfulness because it steals youth. It'll certainly get lots of the money as well. It gets the oxygen into her eyes. It gets the health of a trillion cells in her body. So it gets an awful lot from the deal. So you need to more than quite enjoy it for the deal to be worth it. And I said, if you're singing from the rooftops, orgasmically every time you smoke one puff of a cigarette, if it's the most meaningful thing in your life, if it's wonderful and it's the only thing that matters to you, then carry on smoking. And of course, so now we're laying it out bare for the person in an unusual way. And she kind of looked a bit shocked, and she said, especially when I said orgasm, and she said, "Well, I don't enjoy it that much, you know." And but we so really it's focusing on what it steals from you and what it takes. And you're in the privileged situation of working with addictions, so you can be reminded of what it stole from you, what it was stealing from you, what it took from you, day after day after day, so that it becomes bigger and bigger for you. So the amnesiac effects of the dopamine doesn't kick in anymore. People are so attuned to the downsides
Yeah.
during that phase.
Now you mentioned your online program. So that was another one of my questions. Is this something you can do in an online capacity? What does that look like? And what are some of the other things hypnosis can be used for?
Certainly, you can treat people online and train people online. We can use hypnosis for physical pain control, motivation, childbirth, trauma. There's a specific technique called the rewind technique, which we use for trauma, which lots of people use without having learned hypnosis and wouldn't necessarily know that it was a hypnotic technique, but certainly it is. Yes, alcohol abuse we can use hypnosis for. There was a surgeon in Ireland called Jack Gibson who did hundreds, maybe thousands of operations just using hypnosis as an anesthetic. But he also produced a cassette tape, so this is a while ago, for alcoholics in Ireland. And one of the techniques he used was to give them the same feelings of being drunk, pleasantly drunk, without alcohol, just hypnotically, which is a big reframe for them. It was a big reframe, I guess, because it helped them experience the fact that they could meet the needs in healthy ways without necessarily doing anything that's bad for themselves. So yeah, there are lots of applications of hypnosis.
And what is the hypnosis process like? Like if I went on your website today and purchased a program, what is the process like?
Right. Well, you'd have it's simply you listening to it. So you download the audio, and then you'd be encouraged to listen to it, in a quiet place, not when you're driving or operating heavy machinery, or riding a horse. Then you simply listen to it when relaxed in a relaxed way, maybe 2 or 3 times a week until you start to notice a benefit. If you don't notice a benefit, then there's a 3-month no questions asked guarantee as well. So you could either swap it for another one or get a refund. So yeah, it's as simple as that. And
How long does it take for people to feel results or notice some
so
results?
people vary. Some people are very
Yeah.
attuned to hypnosis and may get results after the very first time. For other people, it might be more incremental. It might take a few weeks, a bit longer. Yeah, it is purely down to the individual.
And when people see results, because I know when I did EMDR, it kind of took me a while to realize that I was having results. And it was in very subtle ways. So I like to point those things out for people to manage expectations because I don't want somebody to think they're going to do hypnosis and do it because we're addicted people, right? So you say do it 2 or 3 times a week. What my people are going to do is do it twice a day and of course overdo it and then expect to have really fast results and what their expectation is of a result is going to be different. And what I noticed with EMDR is my responses to things were
Mm.
different. Something would happen that used to make me angry and I would just notice that I wasn't having that same response to it.
Yeah.
I felt some growth and a lightness where, some weight had been lifted from me, but it was in very subtle ways in my day to day life.
Mm.
So, all of that being said, could you give an idea of what people would see realistically as a result?
We've got a session called "Be Calm with That Person." So sometimes people will have a particular person in their life that just winds them up the wrong way. And so a result with that would be the next time you see them, you feel strangely calm, or you feel in touch with your resources, or you don't lose your head and feel rushed or pressured. that would be indicative of a result. Likewise, if someone was going to the dentist, they had a dental phobia before, then they'd feel calmer and more relaxed, or they'd feel less. If it's for drinking, they'd feel less inclined to drink wine every night, or drink less of it to start with, and perhaps much less of it going forward. So those are that's the sort of feedback that we get with post-traumatic trauma. I would prefer to see that one-on-one. We have downloads which sort of touch upon that, but if it's a really heavy trauma, then but you would expect results immediately. The stronger the trauma, the more dramatic the change, and the more immediate as well. So it shouldn't be a process that takes weeks and weeks and weeks. It should be fast, because the brain learns to be traumatized very quickly in a matter of seconds of a bomb going off. So it shouldn't take months and months and months, because the brain can learn quicker than that, or unlearn the trauma quicker than that.
Right.
So we'd expect something like a very strong phobia or a very strong traumatic affect to be ameliorated, fast.
Oh, I love that. Thank you again for coming on and having this conversation. This has been amazing. And I know my audience is loving this. And for everybody listening, I will link Mark's website in the show notes so you can get there right from your podcast app, because I know you're all going to want to be buying some hypnosis now, especially since he said for the problem person in your life that triggers you. I know half my audience is going to be buying that one. Yeah. But thank you so much.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on your show. And, anytime in the future, I'll be happy to talk to you as well.
You've reached the end of another great episode of the Addiction Unlimited podcast. Candid and honest conversation about addiction and recovery. Be sure to visit us at addictionunlimited.com to join the conversation and access show notes and links to everything we talked about. Love this episode? Please take 30 seconds to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes to help us improve and give you the information you want. Thanks for listening. See you next week.